Well, hello and welcome back to the Lamppost Listener, where usually we go chapter by chapter through different works of children's literature, but today we have a special episode, and I'm doing it all by myself. Daniel is not here, and I get to talk to John Hendrix. John, welcome to the show.
Hey, glad to be here.
I was thrilled. The story is John Hendrix wrote a book called Mythmakers. I'll do his official bio in just a second, but John, my dad gave me your book for I think he ordered it ahead of time so that it would arrive as soon as it came out. And I opened it up, started reading, and then had to go find a place to sit down and just tore through it.
Yeah, it got you. That's great.
Yeah, and I think it's something really special, and so I started promoting it to everybody I that was within earshot about how great it was. One of those people being the co-host of the show, Daniel, and he's like, well, we got to have him on the show. And I thought that's a great idea because I really want, this is one of those unique works that I think is so special that we have to promote it, get it out there.
Oh,
And
that's really kind. Thank you.
yeah, I'm so glad you could join. So I'll read a quick bio of John Hendrix for people who don't know him. And then we'll jump in and ask you a few questions and get some background information and see how everything came together. John Hendrix has written and illustrated a range of best-selling books, including The Faithful Spy, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and The Plot to Kill Hitler, which was a YALSA Award for Excellence in Nonfiction for Young Adults finalist, and the picture books Go and Do Likewise, The Parables and Wisdom of Jesus, Shooting at the Stars, The Christmas Truce of 1914, Miracle Man, The Story of Jesus, and Nurse, Soldier, Spy, The Story of Sarah Edmonds, a Civil War Hero. Hendrix is also the author artist behind the adult books The Holy Ghost, Spirited Comic, and Drawing is Magic, Discovering Yourself in a Sketchbook. He has chaired the MFA Illustration and Visual Culture program in the Sam Fox School of Design and Visual Arts at Washington University in St. Louis. Hendrix lives with his family in Webster Groves, Missouri.
Thank you. Yeah, sounded great.
That is a great bio, but it doesn't even begin to cover the other awards that you have. I was doing some research before we met up, and you were heavily awarded.
Yeah, yeah. I'm well decorated at the moment. Yeah,
Yeah.
eventually we'll all lay those trophies down. So I'll just enjoy the work for now. I honestly, that's why I make my stuff. I really do love the process of making it, and honestly, after I finish it, if it does to one reader, basically what it did to you, which is make you want to read the book, I feel like it's been just a huge success. So it's really been cool seeing just how many people had like that experience that you had. I have heard from so many people that it just grabbed them. They many of them had never read graphic novels before in any regular way, and the book just spoke to them, which is awesome.
Well, the fact that it's a graphic novel, I think, is actually really key. There are certain topics that the graphic novel format is just so perfect for, and this story is among them. The other one that comes to mind, just thinking about ones that have had a big impact, are Art Spiegelman's Mouse, which you wrote about Dietrich Bonhoeffer, similar time period, World War II, and just there's something that can be conveyed with images and words together. In one interview, I heard you say that this is 100% words and 100% drawings.
Yeah, that's
How
right.
did you arrive at this? I have a guess, but I want to hear what your response is first.
Well, I just happen to believe that any story gets better with pictures in it, and I think that in the right hands, that is the best way to learn, especially for people that have a visual mind, and it's really not everyone, but let's just say half the world learns visually, and so that combination of words and images together. I think does a kind of gestalt, which is an art school word for a third thing that is neither word nor image, and
Mm.
that is what makes graphic novels so magic in my point of view. So yes, I came to this story to make a graphic novel mostly because that's what I do. I draw, but also because the world of Tolkien and Lewis, their stories have been illustrated a gazillion times. And frankly, every time there's a new illustrated version of Lord of the Rings, I buy it, right? I'm a
Mhm.
sucker. But one thing that had never really been illustrated that they sub created together, they sub created in my mind three things. They sub created Narnia, Middle Earth, and the third thing was the Inklings. Their own friendship was a kind of fantasy that has taken on a mythological shape. And so to me, I was like, this is a story that has to be illustrated. So that's where I began.
Yeah, this was so thrilling because it felt like it was new, and it was covering some things that I had heard before, but because you presented it in a visual way, I felt like it was more accessible somehow. But the other piece was I've heard little snatches and fun facts, and I've heard about them hanging out at the pub and having conversations and challenging each other to things, but this was all in one book. This wasn't, oh, I think someone said that in a lecture one time in 2018. And then I saw a slideshow, but I don't have the slides. I have a fuzzy recording of that thing. So
No,
you,
it's true. It's one of those stories that people know the shape of, and they're like, "Oh yeah." And frankly, the internet is so bad at this because things get attributed to Lewis all the time. Well, and Tolkien actually, quotes that are apocryphal, and like, so you're right. Like there are amazing scholarly books about their friendship, but very few people who are not scholars have the time or patience to read multiple 400-page books. And so, yeah, there is a kind of appeal to like what it means to give someone a usable history for something that is important. And that I try to do that with all my books is like, how do you take something complex and put a handle on it so you can kind of pick it up and carry it around with you? And I think that's what this format can do ideally.
definitely. And what I see is it's a beautiful book, and it truly is one of the most beautiful. The colors, the art itself is wonderful, but I think that you can almost fall into the trap of thinking, oh, this is just a pretty dolled up version of this information. But what you actually did that was so special to me was you consolidated information from everywhere, but then you also referred to the things that you were pulling from so that we can go and do more research on those things. I think the worst example of text and image being combined is when someone takes a screenshot of an Instagram post and puts it on Reddit, and then that gets screenshotted and posted on Facebook.
Yeah.
And now you can't access the
Copy of
fuzzy
a
text.
copy of a copy. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
right.
and it's like, oh, where was that? And I
Yeah.
can't find it because it was something that happened in the feed that scrolled past. And you've actually linked to either online resources, or you've said what the title of a paper was or what the name of a book is if you want to go see this.
Hmm.
And on that note, I'm curious, how did you decide which things to have as an exact quote, and then how did you decide which things you were going to paraphrase? Because I think sometimes the exact quotes might pull you out of the story. Oddly,
Yeah, it's hard because the challenge with any book like this, especially in a graphic novel, is like the Inklings did not do anything exciting visually. They sat and talked like so. You have to figure out that I used a device in this book with an imaginary lion and a wizard that helped narrate this story to allow us to do some visual things that are a little more fun. And it also gave me this device where I can actually have sort of Lewis and Tolkien having extemporaneous conversations, but it's not cited or it's not fan fiction. I actually really hate those like throwback stories in history where we imagine a real character doing something that we don't have a lot of information for. It's
hmm
like it's confusing.
yeah,
So in this book, with one notable exception at the end, every time we see Lewis and Tolkien talking, that is from an event that I could source to multiple documents. Now, in most of those cases, we don't have verbatim quotes. There are a few that we have referenced in letters and poems and things that they recalled. But again, sometimes you just have to get the scene to work correctly, you have to just imagine what the dialogue might have been to help the reader go along with that. So you have to use some judgment there. And I tried to make note to the reader so that when you get the asterisk, I'm pulling from a source quote.
yeah, yeah. And I think that the explanation at the beginning, and there's, I think maybe on the copyright page or something, you said like, "Here's what I did,"
Yeah.
and that made a big difference too. You're just being upfront and honest about it, which
Yeah.
kind of cuts any contradictions or things people could say about it.
Well, because also it works the other way too, because if you don't do that, then it sort of is like the based on a true story concept where you like watch a biopic and suddenly you realize like, oh no, like Bohemian Rhapsody, it's like it's all fiction basically.
Yeah,
So I wanted readers to know like the coin flip, like these things were all real. And so, the idea that this is not just something that is a flight of fancy, but that has lots of scholars behind it, and I'm just sort of aggregating them for the reader.
Yeah. Speaking of coin flip, is that how you decided to tackle this subject in particular?
Well, the publishing industry is a weird place in a lot of ways. So, but my Bonhoeffer book came out before this, and it did fairly well. And so they're like, "We'd love for you to do another kind of story like this." And their suggestion was like the hiding place. They were thinking sort of
That's
like,
Corey Ten Boom.
yeah, Corey,
Yeah.
like you just did a World War II story. You've got an audience there that kind of fits the world, the Christian theme. And of course, I was not interested in doing the same thing I had just done. So I pitched them Lewis and Tolkien. Initially, they were, I don't know, they weren't immediately convinced. Well, one, I said, I think I like doing books about books in a way. And I also feel like 100x people know who Tolkien and Lewis is versus Dietrich Bonhoeffer, right?
Mhm.
So I just feel like there is this massive audience out there, and eventually they came around and were like, oh yeah, this is the right project. This is the thing for you. We know how to market this. It found independent bookstores, understood how to market it, and that's all the weird stuff that goes into publishing. It's not just like a good idea, but how can you make a vector between you and a potential audience out there?
Right, because you do want it to sell,
You
and
do.
at
That's what they would like it to do. Yeah.
right, and I think we want it to sell too because we want it to be out there, and we want more works like this.
Yeah, you
And
want to
there,
you want to say like, "Oh, we should make more of these books because here is a pipeline." And that's ultimately what all great authors do is they open up that little communication between like, "Hey, this is the content I like making and this is a group of people who want to read that."
yeah. Speaking of the people that want to read it, I every now and then something that I'm interested in makes it so far up in society's awareness that I start getting messages about it from people that I wouldn't expect. A small example is there's a local kind of unknown artist here, and all of a sudden he blew up so much that my dad was messaging me about him. And I
Uh-huh.
thought,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
how in the world did that happen?
Yeah,
Um,
that's so funny.
and on that note, Kevin Kelly, the founder of Wired magazine,
Yeah.
recommended your book
I know.
in a newsletter I follow.
Oh,
Recommendo, and I thought,
so
whoa,
many people sent me that. Like the book had been doing fine, but whatever reason, like the Wired email blast that went out to everyone, I probably got 15 notifications from people. So yeah, there are these moments in life where it like a particular person just taps into a network that normally does not interface with YA literature and graphic literature. So yeah, it's so funny.
yeah. And he compared you to Joseph Campbell, who
Yeah,
specifically to The Power of Myth, but he's also known as the author of Hero with a Thousand Faces.
yeah.
So just to have all that connected was such a cool thing for me. Another fun connection is I went to school for illustration as well, and I don't do it as much as you do by any means, but I do remember when I would draw in church, and I hadn't seen your work yet. This is back in 2010, and someone goes, "Oh, do you know who John Hendrix is?" And I look your work up. I'm like, "Oh, whoa, this is
Whoa.
this is really cool." And then now, 14 years later, I get to talk to
Oh,
you
that's
face
great,
to
man.
face over video, which is so fun. But I bring that up because one, it had a big impact on me, and I want to thank you for that. It was so cool to see a Christian illustrator doing so well. I think that Christian media has not always been very good. I think there are always exceptions. Tolkien and Lewis are
Mhm.
up there, but I think a lot
There's
of it,
like weirdly, there's still the ur text of like the perfect example of that, which is feels like we should have some more examples since then. But yeah, no, I know what you mean. In many ways, they are still the thing we are aspiring to do as makers. That believe that we should not be Christian artists. We should be artists who are Christian and that our work transcends the sacred secular divide. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. No, I struggled with how do you live out your faith and make work that's not just a pair of hands with nails through it every single time, or like a lot of drawings of a cross, or like kind of like a sunset and kind of Easter bulletin illustration type things, and your
Man,
work blew
if
all that
you
out of
had
the water.
told I totally get that. If you had told me like when I was 22, that at my age I would be making picture books about literal Jesus, I would be shocked, because
Yeah.
it's not that I didn't want to do that. It's just the examples that I had of that were not really bad. I mean, they might have been bad a little bit, but they were just profoundly uninteresting, right?
Yes.
And the last thing I wanted to do was make work that was just not worth even talking about or looking at, or didn't do anything with the visual stuff itself. So yeah, I have always longed to just make excellent work. Um, and the weird thing is that the more I tell this to my students all the time when they're asking, like, how do I write my own works? And I'm like, the things you think about the most are going to end up in your work. You can't keep
Hmm.
them out. It is only a matter of time before the way we invest our hearts and minds ends up in your work. And as Annie Dillard famously said, the way we spend our days is the way we spend our lives. And so
Hmm.
to me, I was thinking about that stuff in the Bible and the stories of Jesus and the romance of the Christian story so much that eventually that work just leaked out into the stuff I was writing and thinking about. So yeah, that was, I mean, my church drawings I think are still the things that I kind of love the most, that I have the least problem with, that I still enjoy making probably the most out of anything.
Hmm.
And that I think is revealing in a way, because it has a way of combining the content I love, the activity of drawing, the unexpectedness that comes in a sketchbook, all of that stuff. But yeah, that is a challenge to make work that is real, that is authentic, and that is interesting.
Yes. The sketchbook stuff that you did, I know I'm picturing the things from 2013 and earlier, but I can see the kind of the preamble to what you came up with for this book. So for people who haven't seen the work and are listening to this for the first time, it is type, and there are characters walking on top of the type. There are all these hidden references. There are little details that are in Tolkien's work that are in his drawings that you've snuck in there.
Yeah,
Um, there are characters doing things that aren't. It's not directly addressed, but they're walking together. The clothes, even Lewis doesn't have a joint in his thumb,
that's
and
right.
you included that in every drawing. Like
Yeah,
he has a different aspect of his physicality there. But I see the evolution there, and I think your work is so perfect for this because this is just how you communicate. You're drawing and writing together. I have two questions on that. One, is there any technical challenge to publishing a work like that? Like, do you have to decide, do I draw this type? Because you have your handwriting, and then you also have
hmm,
print printed type, like kind of like a
yeah,
font, more like.
that's a really good question. So, like, the biggest issue with drawing your type is foreign editions, and so now I have typefaces that I have made out of my handwriting to allow them to be set in other languages, at least Romance languages, because this typeface I have with my handwriting has a lot of alternate glyphs.
Okay.
But so like for Bonhoeffer, I did a lot of hand drawn type that had to be redrawn when it went to a new edition. So I kind of learned from that. I love the hand drawn type, but like in Miracle Man or Go and Do Likewise, those are basically English only editions. There's no way those can be translated. So again, that's one thing you have to think about when you're making a book that engages letter forms as objects.
And is there any challenge with converting to an ebook? Like, are ebooks just not an option, or do you have to release it as a larger file because it's so many images? And
Yeah, it basically can't be a text only file. But um, uh, the Faithful Spy now has an audiobook version, which I didn't even know was possible with a graphic novel. And apparently, they don't even describe the panels; they're just reading the text, which is very odd. I mean, it must be for like if you have the book in front of you. I don't
and
know.
you and you want it read out loud too?
Yeah, I don't know. Apparently, it's doing well, but yeah. So again, now they have digital ebooks that have the ability to display basically full images on them at a pretty low file size. So yeah, it seems like it's okay.
Yeah, I've always thought it would be funny to have someone reading comics out loud. Okay, and then in the panel two,
Exactly.
the
Yes,
tiger has more of a smirk on his face,
that's
and
what I
he's
expected. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
just kind of a bumbling author or trying to describe what they were going for. And
Yeah, exactly.
are there any other Easter eggs that people should be on the lookout for? So I mentioned the disjointed thumb and or the not disjointed, but the lack of a joint in the
Well,
thumb,
I
and
mean,
then
if you have read Lord of the Rings or Narnia at all, there are things throughout the book that are like basically visual pastiches of things from those worlds. And so very quickly you get the sense of like, oh, it's like I'm being dropped into this blenderized version of those two worlds together. The jacket, the book jacket itself is a combination of the original Hobbit dust jacket and the Wood Between the Worlds from Magician's Nephew. So like there are things inside the book that are sort of soaked and marinated in uh, Tolkien and Lewis imagery. And there are a few minor Easter eggs in there for my family that I have, like inside jokes. This is a great thing about doing your own books like this is you can just hide. There's so many bookcases and everything to like put stuff in that
Yeah.
you can just basically make a personal joke for every one of your friends if you want. So yeah, it's fun to do that stuff.
One of my favorite things to draw is a photo frame in the background that you can't see all of, and then to
Yeah,
add some scene with more characters.
yeah,
And it's so freeing. I've almost thought maybe that's how I should do the thumbnails to begin with, is
yeah.
just
That's right. Yeah.
draw that small in another illustration. For your process, what goes into a page? Because I'm picturing at least 20 layers, Photoshop file, maybe Procreate on the iPad. What are you doing now, and has it changed at all since you've done a couple books at this point?
Yeah, ever since I've done graphic novels, I've done all the coloring digitally. It's just much easier, especially when I'm working with these limited palettes. But all the art starts out by hand. I just enjoy drawing with pencil and pen and ink. So I do a rough sketch and redo a rough sketch. I'll often manipulate it digitally to get the proportions right. And then I put it under a sheet of paper and on a light table and do original inks that way. So
Okay.
in some ways, I just enjoy drawing with a pen more than a stylus. And also, it has the bonus of I have original art that I can sell from the book. So it's just one of those income streams you can create. And so it's something I've been teaching young artists actually to do. If you've got the time to make that original art and have an artifact that's alongside the book, not just the digital file.
Uh, if you don't mind, I'd love to get into the weeds for just a moment.
Oh, yeah. Let's
I
do
love
like
to.
pen talk.
Yeah, I want to know. Are you using dip pens and nibs, or do you have a special Pentel version of something? Have you modified a pen to do something? Or are you using brushes at all?
Yeah,
Let's
it's
talk
mostly
specifics.
yeah, oh man, I love this. No one does this on any podcast, so finally we're doing it.
Excellent.
I use a Japanese zebra brush pen, an extra
Okay.
fine, and then I also use microns basically. So between those two, the great thing about them is they're cheap, they're disposable, and they're totally water fast and light fast.
Okay.
So I have used dip pens in the past. They take longer to dry. They're a little more tedious. So the great thing about like pens with a cap on it is you can travel with them. They come with you. And so basically I did the whole book in those two pens, the zebra one and the microns.
And then what size paper are you doing? Like a 11 by 17 to match the kind of standard comic book
No, I
format, or?
usually work about 120% above final print size, and in this case, it
Oh,
was a little larger than that. So, these pages probably were 13 by 19 by the time I got done with them.
okay.
So they were a bigger scale, and it just allows you to get in there and not have to worry too much about the details.
And are you doing sketches, scanning it in, getting it fixed up, printing it out, and then doing the lightboard stuff? Are you inking directly on a lightboard, or are you doing a final pencil version and then
Yeah, I
inking on
don't
top of
do a
that?
final sketch. That's one thing I have learned over the years that my inks are a little more organic if I don't have everything penciled into that final sheet of paper because you end up like getting this wooden final drawing where it feels very traced.
Yeah.
And so, like, a little bit of letting yourself as a drawer trust that you can draw in that final ink gives a little life to the lines. And so, of course, that's 20 years of practice, and I figured out the best way to do it at this point. But yeah, that was always a problem with me early on, is just getting these beautiful sketches I loved, and then the finished art was just super wooden,
Wooden.
like a
Yeah.
statue. Yeah,
And dead. Yeah. It definitely seems like it has helped you keep it fresh because it's just there. Let's take a look at the cover of the Mythmakers for just a second. There are no black inks except for the character's hair.
Yeah.
How are you changing the colors for these kind of things? Are you isolating different parts and doing some wizardry? It's a beautiful look, and I feel like it's been consistent too. You've really come up with something. So
Yeah.
how do you do that?
Yeah, well, inside the book, the color kind of helps you keep track of where we are in the story because basically the black ink, the key drawing being black, is kind of reserved for Tolkien and Lewis as their selves, right? And then when Lion and Wizard are talking or they're riding a dragon, the key drawing changes into one of those secondary tones like the gold or the purple or the navy. And so then on the cover, I wanted to try to emulate that where you've got them as kind of the only black key drawing along with the type, and then everything else is just sort of sitting back in those golds and purples. And so yeah, that all starts as basically one drawing. I do the type on a different layer. I did the main characters on a different layer, and then as I scan them in, I just isolate them out, drop that line color into a different tone, and then in Photoshop it's just a total mess. It's all sandwiched together.
Yeah.
There's 150 layers in there.
Oh, okay. These are quite large files.
Yeah.
So I asked that as a technical question, but there's actually a storytelling element to even the way you did that. That's pretty fun.
Yeah.
In terms of, I've wanted to ask an author this for a while. In terms of buying your book, what do you think is the best way for someone to purchase your work? Is it do you want it directly from your website? Do you want it from the publisher's website? Do you not
Oh,
mind
yeah,
where
like
it
a
comes from?
method that's well, actually, in terms of percentages, it's all the same. Every book is a
Okay.
book. And of course, generally, I tell people to support a local bookstore. Usually, I mean, honestly, that local bookstores are now such a pipeline to publishers that
Mhm.
publishers really keep track of what the local bookstores are doing.
Okay.
So that's great. Amazon, awesome, whatever. I mean, they're shipping a gazillion books, so it's hard to tell people not to use them for whatever reason. But yeah, I don't sell any books on my website except for one of my books, which is out of print, and I just have a couple dozen copies left.
Okay. So every an order comes in and you grab one and
Yeah,
ship it
that's right.
out. um, one of the things we try to do on this show is introduce people to works besides Lewis. So it started out we covered all seven of the Chronicles of Narnia, and then we did a intermediate season. Season 8 was talking about some of Lewis's essays, and then we did one Tolkien essay. And then in season 9, we're now working with George MacDonald's The Princess and the Goblin.
Oh, nice. Yeah,
And so we're kind of going back. We're saying, okay, who influenced Lewis? And I wanted to see who are some of your influences. What are the highlights that come to mind when you think, oh, this is someone I would really like people to read? But I also am curious, what are you listening to maybe this week? Because it sounds like you have quite a bit of time to listen to audiobooks while you're drawing. It actually seems like drawing helps you focus on what's being said. You've
yeah.
said from some of your sketchbook
It's true.
and church
Man,
interviews.
when I am listening to something, I'm way more locked in than if I'm just doing one activity. It
Mhm.
probably is because I have some sort of brain malformation. But I am currently reading The Name of the Rose, which was this huge book from the 80s, which sold like 50 million copies. It's like one of the books of the 20th century, and it's
Wow.
about monks, a murder mystery in a monastery in like the 1300s. So really interesting, super long, and really fun to read. The partially I'm reading that because I'm in a book club and I got assigned it, but it's also a really great text to help me with my next project, which is the Salem witch trials. And
Oh,
yeah, and so there's a lot of persecution in that book, and sort of it has very similar psychological trappings of the witch trials. So that's been one that's really helping me recently.
wow.
Um, and then boy, who to read ahead of Lewis? Like if you're sort of in the Lewis department, like actually in the back of the book, I have some resources for some of the early fantasists, like before epic fantasy was really reinvented by Tolkien and Lewis, or Tolkien especially. Um, William Morris wrote these really strange books, kind of the first fantasy novel that had a map in the front of it,
Hmm.
Sundering Flood, really strange, interesting. Um, Edison. Oh, I can't remember the title of the book he read, but I read portions of it. It was super interesting. Again, these were people that influenced Lewis and Tolkien, and Lord Dunsany is another guy from that era that wrote these sort of proto. epic fantasy novels. But you know, Lev Grossman's new book. He wrote The Magicians.
Uh,
His new book. He has a one that's a retelling of the King Arthur legend, called The Bright Sword, and I'm in the middle of it now. It's great too.
okay, that does sound amazing, and that's a unique list too. I don't think that I've heard of most of those. So I'm looking forward to diving in. We'll try to
Yeah,
include those in the show
you
notes
can
too.
get buy Mythmakers, and it has a an extensive list in the back in the first no, no, the third portal you take.
Okay. Oh, that was the other thing. The portals were so fun. It really reminded me of the choose your own adventure type
Oh yeah,
things.
that's been
Um,
such a hit for people. I think I'm gonna do a version of that in my next book because people had so much fun with it.
it was also you did it in such a relaxed way. You said you can do this, you don't have to, and it it was so much
Yeah.
calmer than what I'm used to. Which is, I don't know if you've read any of Robert Greene's work, but
Oh
he
yeah,
has the main column, and then he has a bunch of margin stories that are completely different, and
yeah,
then he has footnotes,
yeah.
and I just don't know which one
Like,
do I.
you're stressed out. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm on a footnote, and then there's this red text over here, and I'm distracted, and not that Bibles are much better. You know,
No,
Bibles
I
have
know.
all
It's
they're like, oh,
because
go check out Deuteronomy and see what
I'm
that says.
totally a maximalist, and my editor is very helpful because I had all those footnotes in the body of the main story.
Oh,
And he
wow,
very helpfully was like, "This stuff is interesting, but it's like I think it's too much." And he wanted me to cut it fully. And I said, "I don't think I can cut this cuz like it's part of the reason why I'm writing this." And so he's like, "Well, come up with a way to allow us to navigate through it." And so then we came up with the doors concept, and it worked cuz that was a theme throughout the book anyway. So, yes.
yeah, okay. So it was actually a solution to you
It
had more
was
stuff in there
to
that
my
you
own
wanted to
problem. Yeah, exactly.
that you created. That's fun.
Yeah.
So it sounds. I was going to ask you what you're working on next. It sounds like it's a Salem witch trials based thing. Is there anything else you can tell us about it, or is it still
Well,
in the
it's
beginning
funny
stages?
because like it's one of those that people think they know, kind of like the Mythmaker or the Tolkien Lewis story, or it's like we have this shape of we're like, yeah, I know what happened, religious nut jobs, the Crucible, whatever. And but the truth is, it's way more interesting and weird and scary than people think, and it reveals so much about the like core American ideas, like the whole reason we are Americans are at the root of the Puritans, and they had a ton of problems, but there were also things about them that were actually really admirable. And so that's
Mm,
why the Salem witch trials are so strange because they actually were the moderates, believe it or not. Like the pilgrims were the like total lunatics, you know? Like in any way, there's just so much involved in this story that I've always wanted to do a scary book. I've always wanted to do one that's like um I'm structuring the narrative a little bit like Rashomon, where you get like perspectives on a story, and then you get another first person point of view that kind of contradicts that opinion, and so
mm.
it's going to kind of immerse the reader into that story.
That sounds great. Is there a general sense of time of how long these things take? Do you like how long did Mythmakers take? And is it the only thing that you worked on? Or I know you do editorial and advertising campaigns too.
Yeah,
How do you fit
that
it all in?
that one took me about 5 years. So I do other things during it. The reading takes me so long. Again, like you said, I do other work. So yeah, this one is probably going to be 2028 by the time I'm done with it. It's a little shorter than Mythmakers, but yeah, and I'm doing other projects. I've got a follow up to Drawing is Magic, a sequel to Drawing is Magic that comes out in 26. That's the thing on my desk right now. So I'm kind of
Okay.
writing Salem in the background while I'm drawing these other things.
Okay. Wonderful. We have a lot to look forward to in several years.
Yeah, that's
it
right.
sounds it
Yes,
sounds like.
I only could do so many, so you got to. I go to schools and I like talk to kids, and I'm like, okay, I'm really glad you liked the book, and they're like, when's the next one out? And I'm like, well, you'll be in college, so
That
hope you enjoy it.
I actually moved my question I wanted to ask you about your next book to the if he brings it up section because I think that must be the most annoying thing. You work on something for 5 years, you finally get it out, people read it in 3 hours, and then they want to know what's next. It's like I
Exactly,
don't know. Why don't you go read any of the other millions of books that are out there?
that's right.
Go
And I
enjoy
tell
this.
people, hey, read a chapter a night. Give me at least 7 days instead of 1 hour. Or I met this kid who was like 10 years old. He's like, I read it last night in an hour. When's the next one? I'm like, oh my gosh, kid, go
Yeah,
read it again.
yeah, or read it a little slower and
Yeah,
maybe
that's right.
absorb
I'm sure
absorb
you
it.
get some stuff. Yeah.
So my final question before I let you go: you've painted a real picture of how you work on all these things. Are there other things that you're doing in addition to drawings? And it sounds like you have a great family. It sounds like you fenced for a while. I'm
I
curious
did.
if you're still fencing.
Yeah, I had to give up fencing because I had a wrist injury in my drawing hand, and I was like, oh my gosh, I cannot hurt the moneymaker. So I stopped fencing, even though I just loved it. I fenced for over 30 years.
Wow.
Um, and yes, I do a lot of other things. I'm the chair of a graduate program called MFA IVC, which is Illustration and Visual Culture here at WashU in St. Louis. So that's ostensibly my day job. It's a research institution, so I get bought out to do my work and my research, and they really support my books. So I'm pretty fortunate in that I have this kind of like double career where I am teaching people how to do the thing that then I do in my own practice, and I'm really blessed to have that.
I'm so glad that you're in that position. I had a lot of really great teachers who could answer my questions. They could point out what was wrong in my work,
Yeah,
and they could answer my questions, and then if I still didn't get it, they could take my work and draw on top of it and show me.
yeah, that's right.
And they were setting the example every night. They're like, "I'm going home and I'm finishing this illustration. I'll be up till 3 a.m. and I'm gonna meet this deadline."
Oh,
And
you're like, that's for me, boss. Sign me up.
yeah, I was like, "That sounds great. Let's do it." Well, John, thank you so much for coming on the show. Everybody, go out and buy the Mythmakers. Go buy the other books too. I'm gonna go stock up on get that Bonhoeffer book first, I think, and then also look at the list of names that you gave us in this show.
Yeah, well, please do. I also have a book of comics about the Holy Ghost. If you've ever wondered what the Holy Ghost looks like, he's a cute blue ghost. So,
Oh, I think I
anyone,
can see it. This is audio only,
yeah,
of
yeah,
course, but
that's
I can
right.
see
Yeah,
him
he's
behind you.
there. Yeah,
He's always with you.
he's it's basically Calvin and Hobbes fan art. So it's what does the Holy Ghost do with his time off? He hangs out with a squirrel and a badger, and they talk theology. So if that sounds for you, then I've got the book.
Yeah, count me in. I'll go look at that one too. John, thank you so much. I
All
really
right,
appreciate it.
take care.